Welcome all you viewers of TLBTV out there. My name is Lorana Hoops, and you have joined us once again for an episode of Write the World, where we speak with all sorts of different authors and writers, and we find out wonderful books for you to check out, and of course, everything about writing that you would want to know. Today, I am joined with a wonderful guest. This is Robin Leigh Anderson. Welcome, Robin. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you.
Welcome. So glad that you could come and join us. And you have 2 books out currently. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And so your first book, which one was your first book? Because you have 2 different ones.
Right. The first book that came out was Suncatcher. I actually consider myself a science fiction writer, and Suncatcher is science fiction. That was the first one that came out. It came out, I believe, in March of last year. And then the second one, which is a novelized memoir called Accept the Broken Heart, came out in August.
Okay, and you and I had a talk before, but the viewers weren't for that. So why don't you tell us, what is a novelized memoir?
Well, a few years ago, 3 authors named Mortensen, Fry, and Glass made memoir a dirty word because they exaggerated, they misrepresented. And going around and taking my story as a nurse in Vietnam during the war to publishers, they said, oh, a memoir. And the eyes rolled back in their heads until they could see their brains. And I thought, okay, I need to do something a little different. Well, it's kind of hard when you're writing a memoir anyhow because it's first person. And first person is not necessarily terribly relatable to a reader. So I thought, okay, let's novelize it. You can read a first person. I mean, some of Tolkien's books were in first person, and nobody rolled their eyes at that because it was, you were walking in the steps of an elf or a ranger or a dwarf or whatever. You can take first person and novelize it, make it read like a novel with, dialogue and action and so forth, while still representing history. And I was smart enough. I've kept journals my entire life. And I had 4 journals covering a period of 21 months, which covered the 2 tours I was in Vietnam. I had these. They had an incredible wealth of information. And I had how flowers smelled, what we ate on a certain day, clothes we wore, actual dialogue, so that I could go back to these journals and basically just novelize the form that I already had in front of me. I didn't have to rack my brain, because I started this book 25 years after Vietnam, and I didn't have to rack my brain for what happened when. Didn't have to find people that, what happened on this date. I could look up a timeline of history and remember, oh yeah, it was the Battle of such and such while we were doing this over here. And I included that in the book, but this is not a historical book, and it's not a memoir per se. It's war from a young woman's emotional perspective. And it's a story that's never been done before. Nobody has ever really quite written this book. I had a long time trying to market it because nobody quite knew what to do with it. And now in the digital world, you don't have to worry about which bookshelf to stick it on. You could just stick it out there.
Right. That makes it so much easier.
Yes.
When a lot of books don't fit in those nice little tidy categories.
Oh yeah. I mean, the guy at Borders in the city I was living in at the time was all over the book. He had seen bits and pieces of it at a writer's conference, and he wanted that book so badly, but I couldn't give him a classification, and he couldn't think of one either. And because there is no such thing as a novelized memoir on the shelves of Borders, I was out of luck. So, I would love to go back to that guy now and say, it's too bad you can't have my books. They're on Amazon. Nanner, nanner, nanner.
Right? Or why didn't they just give you your own shelf? That would have been a solution. Like, put it
on the side of memoir or on the side of history. But the problem is it's a war story, but not. It's a coming of age story, but not. It's a nurse's story, but not. It's a love story, but not. It's so many things, but not. And I would have had to have had one book in 50 different classifications throughout the bookstore.
Maybe you would have loved a book in 50 different places.
I would have loved to do that, but they didn't really want to do that. That wasn't their corporate stance. And so, I'll never be in Borders, I guess.
Well,
but I am on Nook now. So it's like, I guess I'm still, well, no, that's Barnes and Nobles. Well, yeah.
That's true. That's true. But a lot of, I know people still go to the traditional bookstores, but I think there's so much happening now with the digital, through Amazon and through Nook and through all of those Kobo, all those places that you can find books, that I don't think being in a traditional bookstore is nearly as important as it used to be. I mean, obviously it's still, from an author's perspective, we all want to be in a bookstore and walk in and see our books. But I think it's just getting it out there to people really is the easiest. It's the biggest part. And now that it's so digitalized, it's so much easier. So you were a nurse in Vietnam, which is really like not something that I'm super familiar with, and I'm not sure all my viewers are. Can you tell us a little bit about how it was, what it was like?
It was horrendous. I mean, I've had PTSD for, since 1968. Didn't realize it at the time because, of course, I was only a nurse, just a nurse. Well, as just a nurse, I probably saw more gore and horrendous stuff than the average soldier did on a daily basis. I mean, I was a nurse, and I did brain surgery because there wasn't anybody available, and the side of this guy's skull was caved in.
Oh,
I had to do it. There was a guy down the row of surgeons yelling instructions to me about how to relieve the pressure on his brain until somebody could be freed up to come over and finish the surgery. This kid proposed to me 4 or 5 times because he did survive. The horrendous things I saw, we worked a lot with civilian populations, and when people talk about winning a war, I want to slap them hard. Nobody wins a war, especially the people on whose soil the war is being fought. The civilians are so incredibly impacted. I mean, I was just a kid from a small town in Montana, and I was fresh out of nursing school when I got word that the first of my hometown buddies was killed in Vietnam. And he wasn't just killed, he was the first West Point graduate in our entire community. And he was killed horribly. It tore the town apart for a long time. And it tore me apart because he was like a big brother to me. His younger sister was my age, and when my older brother died, he just came to me and said, "I'll be your brother."
Oh.
So when he died, it just ripped my heart out. And I mean, I one day I was protesting the war on the University of Montana campus, and the next day I was at the campus recruitment center signing up. I had to go, not because I supported the war, but because I didn't. And the boys were dying. The boys were my age. They were 19 years old. Yes, I was a bit young to be graduate of college, but I'm one of those precocious people. And I mean, I couldn't wrap my mind around the fact that kids were over there dying in a war 12,000 miles away.
Right.
And we couldn't really put our finger on what the hell it was we were fighting for. I mean, they talked about the domino theory, which has been so soundly disproven. And pretty much everybody with a brain knew it at the time. And I just had to go. And I knew it was going to be difficult. I had no idea how difficult it was going to be until I got there. I mean, I was in country for 13 days before I was shot.
Oh my gosh.
That was one of 3 times I was shot. I was shot, I was stabbed, I was gang raped by a Viet Cong patrol. All kinds of really fun things. And the number of times that I sat at the bedside of a boy who was in my care to die. June 29th, the moving wall, which is the half-size replica of the Vietnam War Memorial, is coming to the city where I live. I know way too many names on that wall. I actually put a plea out to my church. Are there some women who'd like to come to visit the moving wall with me? Because I can't go alone.
Yeah.
There's no way I can go alone. And I need some prayer warriors with me while I'm there. I need somebody who can hold my hand and pray with me, because it's going to tear my heart out just to see those names, because those names were people in my book.
Right.
Parker and Conway and Delwo and, so many people. 2 of them who died giving their lives to save mine.
Oh, wow.
At 2 different times. And that's a heavy weight to carry.
Yeah. Absolutely. So
that's called PTSD.
How long were you over in Vietnam serving?
The first tour, I was there 16 months. I had never intended to go back, but I went back for 5 months, just before the fall of Saigon, because someone I knew that was still over there called me and said, Vietnam is falling to the north. Well, we were hearing all of these headlines about peace with honor and, unification and blah, blah, blah. No, that was an absolute lie. It was a political game. There was no peace with honor. There was nothing. It was falling. And this is someone that I trusted implicitly. He said, "Have I ever lied to you?" And truthfully, he had never lied to me. He was the CIA agent. He may have lied to everybody else in his life, but he never lied to me. And I went back, not as a nurse then I went back as an agent of the Red Cross to help get people out. And happily, I was able to get over 200 people out of Vietnam.
Wow, that's amazing.
And working in coordination with others, we got thousands of people out of Vietnam, people who would have been killed instantly by the North because they were on the wrong side politically. They had worked for the wrong person. They had gone to school with the wrong person. They blinked twice at the wrong person, and it was already happening in the northernmost cities by the time I got over there. And so it was important for me to sit down in Saigon. And I mean, I spent an awful lot of time chasing down embassy officials to get signatures on documents so that we could get people out of the country. And it was really, that was probably the best part of my heart, except for I lost my Marine fiance
Oh my goodness.
just before we left.
Wow.
And
So
that was a horrible, horrible moment.
this was a
That's actually where the title of the book comes from.
tough time in your life then.
Very. I mean, when you're that young, I mean, I always say that I was young and fearless, and another word for fearless is foolish. And unfortunately, I was young and fearless. I did a lot of really fearless / foolish things, and the impact on a really young person, it colored my entire life.
So how much past this experience did you start writing the book down? I know you had your journals, but I mean, when did you decide to put it into this novelized memoir?
I started working on the book itself in 1996. At that point, I hadn't even told my family that I'd been in Vietnam. My family had a deep rift. My family was very divided at the time that I went, and only 2 people in the world knew I was in Vietnam: my mother and my grandmother.
Oh my
And
goodness.
by the time I started writing the book, both my mother and my grandmother were dead. So I had to tell my brothers I was in Vietnam. Well, one of them said, "I don't believe you." The other one said, "Well, that explains a lot." And it did. I mean, I had PTSD, and not having addressed my PTSD until I started writing the book, it really did explain a lot about the kind of person I was as I was, becoming more of an adult and having my own family and, making my way through the world. It was a very impactful thing. When I started writing the book, that was my PTSD therapy. I screamed and hollered and cried and threw things, and I'm sure my neighbors thought I was a manic depressive off her lithium, because I was crazy. I was crazy for 54 weeks. It took me to write the book, the first draft. And in those 54 weeks, I had to relive it all in order to put it down with any kind of emotional impact. I mean, it's a very emotional book. I've been told that it's one of the hardest reads you will ever read, and you'll go back and read. I mean, there's a guy on Facebook who told me the other day he's reading it for the 6th time.
Wow.
Because it's that impactful. He really wants to get into it even more. And it's like, okay, 6 times. Okay, thank you, I guess.
Yes.
But I had to put the emotion in it in order to make it real. I wanted to make the actual impact of what I went through as real as humanly possible. And just taking the words out of my diary about what I did on a certain day wasn't enough. I was lucky enough to have a very good friend named Ray Bradbury for the last 15 years of his life. And he told me over and over again, show, don't tell. So I had to show in the book what I went through. And in doing that, I went through it again in order to put the proper emotional context into the book. I had to relive it inside me. That was not easy. But I came out the other end of that slightly more than a year, mentally healthier, because I had gone through it again, and with some perspective, 25, 30 years of perspective. And it brought some people back into my life that I had I came back the second time and said, I wasn't there, it never happened, which is exactly the thing that a lot of people do. And that's called PTSD. Then when I finally confronted it and people started coming back into my life was much richer for reconnecting with them.
So as hard as it was really therapeutic being able to write it all out.
Oh, cathartic. I mean, it was totally catharsis. Being able to state how I felt and then demonstrate it, like I said, show, don't tell. I could say, oh, I felt bad about this, or I could show you how I was feeling. And in showing, then I had to feel it again in
Yeah.
order to show it. And yeah, it was an incredible catharsis. I mean, when I talked to Ray after I finished the manuscript, he said, "My God, girl, how did you live?" And I said, "I don't know. I was fearless
Yeah.
slash foolish, but God loves fools."
That's
I mean,
true.
there was never a time over there that I didn't feel I was in God's hands. I really did. There were even times that there's one chapter in the book entitled Psalm 121. I was in the Central Highlands and I was praying to the mountains, which is, Psalm 121, as I lift my eyes up into the hills from whence cometh my strength, it comes from the Lord.
Right.
Well, it did. There were, aside from my injuries, I was also buried alive in a bunker for 3 days that exploded.
Oh my
And
gosh.
people were dying around me. And we were in the middle of Viet Cong territory and didn't know it. And I had no idea if I was going to survive or anything. And I totally felt I was in the Lord's hands every step of the way. This is an absolute proof that there are no atheists in foxholes.
Yes, you hear that all the time, and
I lived it. I lived it. I can
yeah.
tell you that there really aren't. I mean, I ran into a lot of people who marched into Vietnam thinking that they were all that, and they came out of Vietnam very humbled, very damaged, and very connected to a much greater spiritual thing, whatever their spiritual thing was, because you had to be. You couldn't go through that and not acknowledge something.
Right. Right. Yeah, I think that's really important. My husband was in the Air Force for 21 years, and while he didn't serve in anything nearly as big as Vietnam, he went to a lot of really tough deployments, and
Right.
he suffered a lot of PTSD when he came back from deployments as well. And it was really hard on being on the other end of it, trying to help him through, because I had no idea. I didn't, he wasn't allowed to talk about it, and he
Right.
didn't want to talk about it, even if he could have.
Yeah.
So it was hard to have an understanding of what he was going through, not having been on that side. So I can't imagine how hard it would be, in your position as well, because not only are you having to relive it, but then the people around you that didn't have any idea, and they can't really empathize with you because they weren't there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So after that book was when you wrote your second one, right?
Well, I've been writing all my life, and I, for one reason or another, had never really gotten around to submitting a lot of things. Some of it had to do with the fact that my family wasn't very supportive of this creative bent. I heard all my life, stop dreaming, be practical. Well,
Mm.
finally, about the time that I started writing Accept a Broken Heart, somebody told me, keep dreaming and be practical.
Yeah.
And that paradigm shift was all I needed to hear. It was the week that I attended the first Santa Barbara Writers Conference that I ever attended, and which is, by the way, one of the greatest writers conferences in the world. And it really is. I worked there for 10 years. It was so good. Just a phenomenal conference, and that's where I met Ray Bradbury and Barnaby Conrad and Cork Milner and some really phenomenal people. Fannie Flagg, Susan Berry. I mean, I just, the list is endless. Santa Barbara, I was living in at the time, Santa Barbara had a very large writers community, and they were very, very supportive of new up and coming writers all the time. So I went to this conference, and one of my friends said that line to me, keep dreaming and be practical. And then here I'm going into these workshops, and people are saying, oh, that's a great story. Well, I had this little short story called Suncatcher, which was about a guy in the far distant future who crash lands on this alien planet, and he meets an alien woman, and they fall in love. It's kind of like an alien love story, and very, very unusual, because she is a silicon-based humanoid, and basically she looks like a stained glass ornament, like a sun catcher.
Oh my goodness.
And their love story is quite interesting, and there's some real political overtones in it that you think were ripped from today's headlines. It's funny, I wrote the original short story in 1985, and yet you would think that I had just written it the other day, taking headlines from the Washington Post and the New York Times. That was one of many stories that I took into the Writers' Conference, and the fantastic fiction, fantastic with a PH, workshop leader Matt Palomari said, "This isn't a short story. This is a book." And I just laughed. Well, a couple of years later, he introduced me to a publisher who said, I might be interested in this if you made it into a book. And the next NaNoWriMo came along, and I thought, okay, I'll just apply myself for a month and see what I can come up with. Well, I came up with 52,000 words in 26 days.
Oh my gosh.
And I was working full time at a job that I was working like 60 hours a week. And I pretty much didn't breathe or sleep or eat or, I had to bathe because I had to go to work. But other than that, I didn't really live a life for a month. And I went back to the next writers conference with this book, and this publisher said, oh, darn it, we've just changed the focus of our publishing. We're no longer handling science fiction, but could I give you some notes? Well, I'm going to say no.
Right.
So I said, sure, give me some notes. He sends me 4 typewritten pages of notes.
Oh my God.
That were spot on, perfect. And I took those and recrafted the book, submitted it to Foundations, and they said, sure, we'll take it.
Awesome.
So that came out. And then they said, do you have anything else? And I said, well, over the years, I probably have written, I suppose 4 dozen books. And they kind of went, really? And I said, yeah, really. What else? And I said, well, there's this book about Vietnam. And I started to tell them the story, and they're standing there going, okay, we'll take that. And what else? And so it just, I signed a multi-book contract with them.
Wow, that's amazing.
Just, blew my mind. It was kind of like when people say I'm too old, I can't do this or that. Honey, I got a multi-book contract at 67 and I got engaged at 68. It's never too late.
So let's talk about this engagement, because again, the viewers don't know this yet, but this engagement is A, really important in your life, and yes. B, this man that you are, no wait, are you guys married now?
No, we're just engaged right now.
So this man that you're engaged to has been in your books for a very long time. So
yes, I've known Sam for 21 years. And for 20 of those years, he's been pursuing me. But see, he was younger than me. And this was always no, can't do that. Sorry, I'm not going to go there. And this last fall, Sam convinced me, don't be ridiculous. Let's take this deeper. And we did. And I mean, talk about not looking back. I've never felt like this in my entire life. I've never felt so cherished and loved, and the level of connection we have is something that I was only reading about in romance novels. It's really that smarmy. I mean, I laugh all the time about my smarmy posts on Facebook about Sam. Sam has been a leading character in most of my books for a very long time, and I didn't even realize it. However, he's been a beta reader of mine, and he realized it, which is why he never gave up on his pursuit, because he knew that I was in his mind, or he was in my mind, and I wasn't admitting it to myself yet. The main character in Suncatcher, the physical description, the character's character, his ethics, the way he presents himself, his political leanings, it's Sam to a T. I mean, if I took a picture, it would be the guy who's Captain Ard Solstad, who is the lead character of Suncatcher. And of course, Sam is now pointing out all of the different times that I've appeared, or he's appeared in my works, and I'm thinking, and I at one point said to him, why didn't you tell me? And he said, dear, this is like an addict. I can't tell you. You have to come to it yourself.
Right?
And I said, so I'm addicted to you then? And he said, well, I guess so. Yeah, sure, I'll go with that. Okay, so I said, okay, I'll go with that too. And he said, does that mean you're going to give the relationship a try? And I said, okay. Well, he proposed to me just before Christmas.
Oh, that's awesome.
And he's been a beta reader of a few of us. I once said that I had this great beta reader, and everybody else in this one workshop said, oh, who is he? Would he read for us too? Because finding a really good beta reader who will give you the right kind of critique and the right kind of proofreading is really rare. And Sam is an avid reader. And so he's been reading things from, for instance, my cousin, Pike and Sander. She writes romances, and her latest book, Board Games, is Sam's playbook for seducing me into this relationship. And the ring, my ring, let me show you my beautiful canary diamond ring.
Oh, that is beautiful.
Is off page 108 of that book. He knew that I had told Pi about my love of canary diamonds, and I told her about this scrolled antique setting
Oh my goodness.
with pave diamonds and 2 emerald cut diamonds on either side of a canary diamond. He took the manuscript into a jeweler and said, "Make this." And it found out through my cousin Jan my ring size, and dropped to one knee just before Christmas and handed me the ring, and I cried for a half hour. I mean, it was something out of a romance novel. And so then Sam and I jokingly said on Facebook, we're going to write a book about this unconventional relationship of ours. So we started writing we've been saving all of our journal entries, all of our posts on Facebook are going into this book. And the name of the working title of the book is Sam I Am We Are.
Sam I Am
because
We Are. Oh.
His name is not actually Sam. It's an entirely different word. But when he was a little boy, he used to run around with green eggs and ham plastered to his chest, and he'd say, "No, I'm not him. I'm Sam. Sam I am." And it stuck. He's been Sam his entire life, even though that's not his legal name.
Oh my gosh.
So we came up with Sam I Am We Are. And I kind of love that.
I do too.
It's very unusual, and it kind of fits us. We're very unusual. We have an extremely unconventional relationship, and and I said to him, just how graphic are we going to get? And he said, well, we could publish it as a romance novel. I said, I don't think I want to get that. We're not an erotic romance novel, dear. We can tone it down. But I mean, I even put some of his warts on Facebook because I was bragging about this wonderful man. Nobody's perfect, but I was bragging about all of his perfect traits. And somebody said, "Doesn't he have any warts?" And I said, "Yeah, he does." And so I talked to Sam. I said, "Can I publish some of your warts?" And he said, "Like what?" So we discussed it. He has a very controlling nature, only it's not a malevolent control. He will not lock me in a room and refuse to let me see my friends or talk to my mother, or if I'm walking down the street and I smile at somebody, "Who is that?" This is not him at all. He's the kind that when a problem comes up, he wants to take immediate control of everything and fix it. Well, there are some things in life that can't be fixed. Yeah. I'm disabled, and he wants to fix me. I'm sorry, dear. I've got a really good medical team, and they can't. So you can't. And it just adds a string to our relationship for him saying yes, but. Well, the thing with yes, but is that a person who says that phrase does not mean the yes, and they mean everything they say after the but.
Right.
So don't say yes, but, because it'll just make me angry. So I published about his controlling nature. I laughingly call him Mr. Control. And that actually led to a very pensive week for the two of us. We had some very deep discussions about, okay, you've made this public. Am I really like that? Do we really interact this way? Is this really something that we need to work on? And I said, yeah. So, he said, okay, then we'll work on it. But there have been also other things that I've, like last night, both of us had a bad week for a couple of different reasons this week, singly and together. He has a friend here in town that he sends out running errands for him. This friend showed up at my door last night at 10 o'clock with 2 pints of Ben and Jerry's.
Oh my goodness.
Now, see, this is a little unusual because Sam lives in Hong Kong. It's not like he can just call somebody down the block and say, run this over because I'm busy today. Right. Sam calls this guy that he knows and has him go to See's Candy and pick up something for me, or go to Safeways and get me 2 pints of different Ben and Jerry's that I never told him were my favorites, but he just knew because of conversations we've had over the years.
Wow.
And this is the wonderful, smarmy guy that I'm so much in love with. He treats me with such affection and respect, and he really cherishes me, and I do him as well. He's an incredibly intelligent man, and we have the most amazing talks and discussions, which is how his character has made it into my books. His ethics, his political leanings, his character, his human character finds its way into a lot of my characters, because this is a person that I've been loving for a long time and just hadn't admitted it to myself yet. But then when I did, and I suddenly realized this, I thought, wow, we really have something here, don't we? Yeah. And he kind of smiled. Actually, he didn't smile. He gave me a megawatt grin and said, yes.
That's awesome. So is Foundations going to be picking up this book that you guys are writing together as well?
I haven't pitched it to them yet, but they're pretty open to whatever I want to submit to them. They'll probably take. I mean, that's kind of the way they said it when I first mentioned that I had so many books that I could polish and send on to them. Is like, when do you think you can get them to us? And
Wow.
there, I mean, I used to write all of my first drafts by hand, by longhand,
Hmm.
and then I would put them on computer with voice recognition software because God knows that I can talk. And this is my voice recognition headset, as a matter of fact. And so I would just take, I've got like 5 banker's boxes full of manuscripts that
Wow.
I can talk onto the computer, as well as things I'm working on now. Like I've got a science fiction work in progress about a point in human history where certain things are being kind of slowly dying out of the genome. And there's this one trait that is very valuable. And somebody learned how to steal this trait from someone else and make it their own. And the revenge that this woman gets is really fun. And then there's another one about a horrible alien invasion that really is ripped right from the headlines. There's a rather shall we say, difficult American president who's trying to force things onto this Marine officer, female Marine officer, who is also a scientist. And the Canadian premier comes to her rescue. And she ends up living in Canada with her new Canadian husband. And
Oh,
I mean,
wow.
it's really kind of amusing because I started a portion of this story well before the politics of the current day, just like the politics in Suncatcher, which could come right off today's headlines. Yet I wrote the original short story for Suncatcher in 1985. You'd think
Wow.
that I had some kind of foreknowledge, which I didn't. I really don't. But I guess what goes around comes around. Things do cycle in
It's
humanity.
true. It's true. That's why they always tell us we have to learn about history because it repeats itself.
It repeats itself. And I mean, we stupid human beings never learn from our history. Look at how many times. I mean, I was driving down a street one day when we first started invading Iraq. And let's face it, we invaded Iraq.
Right.
And there was a bumper sticker on the truck in front of me that said, Iraq is the new Vietnam. And I got so mad. I'm a Vietnam veteran. I'm going to get out and pummel that guy for saying that. But I couldn't get out of my car right then. And the longer I drove behind that car, the more I realized, yeah, it was. And then we did it again in Afghanistan, and we're going to do it again. I mean, Syria. And it's like, don't we ever learn? So one of the right things with political overtones is because I want to capture somebody's imagination with a story and then kind of sneak some things in there about politics that might make you think a little.
Right.
To me,
Yeah.
that's important. I mean, there is no such thing as just pure entertainment. I think messages are important. You don't necessarily need to hit them over the head with it, but sometimes you do.
That's true. That's true. So, well, show us the covers. I know you have your books there with you. So, show us the
Yes.
covers so we can see these
Okay, this
beautiful.
is Suncatcher.
Oh, wow. That's really pretty.
Yeah, the my cover artist Don Dominique, she's phenomenal. That's Sam there on the cover. Except the character in the book, this is a kind of a shadow that the character is standing in, but Sam has blonde hair, and the character in the book has blonde hair.
Of course.
But this cover is the one that I'm the most proud of. There is a nurse looking out on the monsoon rains with helicopters in the background, and a
Wow.
stethoscope and a helmet.
That's also beautiful.
That again, Don Dominique did this. I mean, she reads my mind. I can tell her half a dozen things about the book and a little bit about the plot, and she'll come back at something, and 9 times out of 10 it doesn't need tweaking. It's like, I love this woman, she reads my mind. And when you've got a cover artist that reads your mind, that can represent the book, because I mean, people do judge a book by its cover, and even though in the digital world you're still faced with the cover when you log into Amazon or Barnes and Noble or wherever you're getting your
Right.
things from, you're still confronted with a cover. And if the cover is not arresting, and if the cover does not say anything about the story that makes you want to take a slightly longer look, because there are so many things out there in the digital world, you need to have something that's arresting enough that people want to stop and read a little bit about the synopsis at least.
Right. And especially for new authors. I mean, I've seen some established authors who can do book covers that are a little less appealing and maybe a little
Yes.
more generic. But as a new author, you just can't. You have to have a good
Yes.
cover. I think that
You
other
have
than
to
the
have
story
everything
itself.
that, yeah, the two things that you need the most in the digital world now are an arresting cover and a short but punchy blurb
Yeah.
on, which is the thing on the back cover that says basically what the book is about. It has to be very brief because people's attention spans in the digital world are very short. So, the fewer sentences you can come up with that still punch you in the throat or not grab you in the throat at
Right.
least, and get your attention so that you want to take, oh, well, let's see. Am I going to buy a book today? Do I want this in digital or paperback or hardbound or whatever? Um, I'm very lucky that I have good editors that help me with blurbs, because blurbs are, synopses are the lifeblood of our industry, and they're so difficult to do.
They
Once you've
are.
once you've written a 200 or 500 page book, how do you condense it into a couple of sentences? But the editor can step back with a hint of objectivity and say, oh, this is, and she'll, like Mary, my editor, will distill it down to me, and I'll just go, okay,
Oh, yeah.
that's what it was. But I wasn't seeing it because, the old forest and trees thing. I'm in the forest and she's way back looking at the trees.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I don't actually have one of those editors because I self-publish. But with my first book, it was kind of like that. I let my dad read it, and my dad calls me and he's like, "What is this book about?" And so I'm telling him what I think it's about, and he's like, "Oh, that's not what I thought it was about at all." And he tells me what he thinks it's about, and I'm like, "Oh yeah, you're right. That totally is a theme of the book."
that's what Mary does for me. She
Yeah,
can distill it down into, just because this is the first time she's read it. Me, I've been living with these characters, these stories, and so forth for years and even decades, and I am too close to the forest. And
mhm.
Mary can just pick up a tree and go, "Oh, it's this." Oh, thank you, Mary. I love you, dear.
Yeah. Yes, those are good people to have around. So even if
Yes,
you don't have an editor, find someone like that who can do that for you, who can look at your book and pull out those pieces, because I think that's
yes,
really important, especially for new authors who are starting or people who are self-publishing that don't have that team yet
hmm
of amazing people. So I know we're running out of time, but I wanted to get a little bit of like, what is the hardest part of the writing process for you, Robin?
stopping a story. Once I start into a story, I live it. I mean, I really, I have a cinematic brain. And when I put that story in my brain, I kind of don't want to leave that universe ever. And
Mm,
it's not even a question of writing a book and then writing a sequel. It's a question of, I don't want to leave that story.
right.
Even with the Vietnam book, which was covered a specific period of time, a specific period of history, so I really couldn't carry it on any longer. I still didn't want to get out of it. I wanted to say more in each chapter. But
Right.
I mean, the book is a little long to begin with, and to say more in each chapter would make it, a 4-volume set, and we really weren't going to be able to market that. The same with Suncatcher. I mean, I wrote Suncatcher as a beginning, middle, and end, and I had no intention of ever doing anything else with it. But I still didn't want to get out of the book. I still didn't want to leave the characters, because by the time I got about 2/3 of the way through the book, I was so invested emotionally in them that I just didn't want to leave them. And
Yeah.
being able to write the words "the end," "fini," whatever language I'm going to use to say it's done, is the hardest thing for me.
I would agree with that. I would agree with that. What about the easiest what's the easiest part of the process for you?
It's the same thing as the hardest: investing in my characters. If I'm going to write a story, if I don't invest in them within the first paragraph,
Right.
Ray Bradbury always told me, um, he said, for instance, if you're writing a mystery novel, you want somebody to die on the first page, preferably in the first paragraph, preferably in the first sentence. You want to grab the person, you want your readers to invest in the character,
Yeah.
the protagonist, or whoever you consider to be your main character. So you have to put something on that first page that makes you invest, so that you can breathe that kind of emotion into the story, so that your reader invests. And so investing in my character is both my upturn and my downturn.
That's awesome. That's awesome. It's one thing I teach writing classes to my students, and it's one thing I really have a hard time with teaching some of the kids is, a lot of them, especially when they're first starting out, they're still in that very much retelling of things and instead of the showing. And so I'm constantly working with, okay, but what do you see? What do you hear? What do you smell? Like, put yourself in that situation with that character and then tell me what you see. And it's a really hard process for them.
Show, don't tell. I mean, that phrase, show, don't tell, has been my lifeblood ever since I started really writing seriously. The first person who told me that was Ray Bradbury and Barnaby Conrad at the Santa Barbara Writers Conference. They said, show, don't tell. Actually, it was Ray who leaned over as I was telling war stories at lunch one day, who said, stop telling war stories and write the damn book. And I said, I'm not writing a book. I'm just telling war stories. And he says, no, dear, you're writing a book. And furthermore, you're going to bring it to the conference next year, and we're going to shop it around to workshops for you.
Oh, my gosh.
Well, when Ray Bradbury says jump, you say how high.
Exactly.
And for 15 years, I mean, he's actually in the dedication of my book. For 15 years, Ray Bradbury helped me try to get across to publishers what it was I was doing. And unfortunately, he died before I found a publisher who let me do it.
Oh my goodness.
But I think he and Barnaby are up there sipping a gimlet saying, yeah, she did it.
We knew it.
We were the ones who told her, show, don't tell.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, the last question I have is just if you could impart one piece of advice for new writers, what do you think would be the most important thing that you could, like Ray Bradbury did for you, what do you think would be the most important thing that you could tell new writers?
Show, don't tell. Be aware of what's going on around you. Nothing, I mean, my favorite saying coming from my brain is nothing in a writer's life goes to waste. Pay attention to everything around you. I mean, people watch everywhere you are. I don't care where you are, people watch. Listen, overhear conversations. If someone's within earshot of you, listen to them. You're not eavesdropping, they're talking too loud. So it's their fault.
Right.
I can't tell you how many times I've got bits of dialogue from somebody who said something hilarious or outrageous or whatever that maybe punched up a certain scene in a characterization more than I would have done had I not gotten this phrase from somebody else. The description of a character. I mean, I will frequently see somebody that I find odious in public, especially at a gathering or I'm a fairly political person, and if I find somebody who's disagreeing with my political stance in public, I will use them as a villain in a book. It's like, don't get in my face. I'm going to kill you in one of my books, and I'm going to make it a really nasty death. That's the thing, is pay attention to your surroundings. All around you at all times are things that you can take into your writing. And then when you do, show, don't tell.
And I never really thought about that until I started writing. And now I find myself laughing because in one of my books in my head that I don't have time to write yet, my gym instructor, I do kickboxing, and my gym instructor is going to be one of my characters. And so I'm like watching him as he's instructing, and he keeps like, what are you doing? And I was like, I'm collecting. I'm totally collecting.
Right, I'm collecting. That's right. I mean, our brains are sponges. Soak it up.
And he knows.
You never know when
something is
going to be important.
Right. So, I mean, just like the way he stands and like his tattoos, and he's on board with it. He knows what's going on. But it's just funny because I'll just be watching him and I'll be like, oh, here's how I could write this scene, And so then I'll go home and I'll like make some notes because I'm not at a point where I can write it yet because I'm finishing another book. But I'm like, okay, I want to make sure and remember that because it was so good.
Don't talk to me about note files. I mean, I've got a 640 gigabyte computer. 2/3 of my files on that computer are notes for stories I haven't even started yet.
Oh my gosh.
Because I've been doing this. When I started writing, my first published short story was when I was 8 years old. I am now 68. So I've been doing this for 6 decades. And I've got all of these stories, most of which I have written down somewhere, just the story notes. I'll never flesh out all of these stories, but I still have to keep the story notes just in case. You never know.
Yeah. I have like 6 in my head right now, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I just want time to write them all down.
6. Oh, you rookie.
I know, right? Well, I'm just starting out, so.
Yes, you're not 68 yet. We'll talk when you get to be 68.
I'm not 68, and I'm working full time, and with 3 small kids, I'm like, oh my gosh. But I did a Facebook takeover this weekend, and in the process of doing my giveaways and stuff, I was like, okay, I just came up with another idea for another book. I'm like, I have to write this down.
I've done that too. Nothing in a writer's life goes to waste. Nothing.
It's so true.
You never know what's going to spur that one little spark, and then off you go to your note file.
That's right. That's right. So for all of you out there watching, you never know when something's going to spur you and stir that bit of creativity. And you could be just like Robin. Robin's got a ton of stories that she's written and not published. We talked about this last time, that you guys don't have to publish everything you write, but write it down, because you never know when that one piece is going to be fantastic, and then you're going to want to publish that.
Yes.
So I want to say thank you so much, Robin, for joining me on this show. And
it was a lot of fun.
I will have a write-up so that everybody can find where your books are and your website, and if you're on social media where they can follow you. So don't worry if you didn't hear it, because I will write it all up for you. I do that for you guys. But it was fantastic. It was fantastic getting to hear about something that happened before I was born, and your take on it. And I'm so jealous that you got to hang out with Ray Bradbury, who is on my list of,
Believe me, it was cool. It really was. I mean, it was sitting down and having a lovely conversation over lunch with Fannie Flagg or Sue Grafton. It was tough, but somebody had to do it. I
did a monologue in high school. I used to do drama competitions, and one of my monologues was from Fannie Flagg. So I would have loved to have met her and been like, I did your monologue. It was all about
go to the writers conference. She's there almost every year. Santa Barbara Writers Conference.
I need to do that. Yes, that requires money though.
Yes, it does.
I don't live in California, so it requires travel too. All right. Well, thank you guys for tuning in, and make sure you join us next week. We'll have another great author or writer or somebody who has to do with the writing craft for you. And I want to say thanks again, Robin. This has been so much fun, and we look forward to talking with you again soon. All right.
Thanks for having me.
Next time on Write the World.